Christmas is officially over, and the next holiday that we all are looking forward to as college football playoff fans is New Year's Eve. Not because it's the new year, although we love that, of course, and we get to have new goals and new ideas and perhaps a new perspective on the life ahead of us in 2023. But more importantly is the fact that that is college football playoff semifinal day, which, as far as I'm concerned, is a holiday. And TCU and Michigan and Georgia and Ohio State, they're all going to be together celebrating this holiday. The other teams will watch. Some won't even want to watch this, knowing that if just for some changes they could have made it. Others will be watching with joy, with anger, with just watching it for the sake of watching it. Some will be cheering on certain teams and hoping that the other just gets embarrassed on live TV. I know that Michigan State fans and a lot of fans in the Big Ten, probably Illinois fans too, with the way that they lost in Ann Arbor before Michigan played Ohio State, will definitely be cheering for Michigan's downfall. I know that when it comes to Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, other teams will probably want to see them annihilated. And I know that for Georgia, listen, Georgia probably against the entirety of the SEC and against the world, because no one wants the reigning national champion to repeat. No one wants that, except for, of course, the reigning national champion. But anyway, both of these teams are impressive. There's a reason they're playoff teams. Both score around 40 points per game. TCU's defense is suspect, but it's actually an average to above average unit. Michigan's, of course, they have one of the most elite defenses in the country. TCU is a sizable underdog. Michigan's not favored by double digits, but they're favored by computers, by analytics. They're much better than TCU is. And Michigan is 13-0 for the first time ever. They've started off with 13 wins. And they look better than last year. This looks like the best Michigan team since 1997. And if this Michigan team wins it all, they might be better and considered better by national pundits compared to the 1997 unit, if they do indeed win it all. First time in program history, they have 13 wins. They've won the Big Ten 2 years in a row. They're the reigning Big Ten champions. This is the first team to go 9-0, undefeated, 9-0 in conference play since 2019 Ohio State, which was also a very elite team, and a team that should have went to the national championship if not for some questionable decisions and some bad calls against Ohio State in that game against Clemson, which I believe that was also the Fiesta Bowl, just the PlayStation Fiesta Bowl. TCU, on the other hand, talking about the Big 12 and TCU's achievements, the first time they've went undefeated in Big 12 conference play, and the first time that they have won 12 games in Big 12 conference play. They started off 12-0. They lost in overtime by 3 points to Kansas State, and rightfully so. The committee did not exclude them from the playoffs or punish them because they participated in an extra game with a close loss. This TCU team and Michigan, too, are very much second-half teams. TCU, they've made comebacks in the second half against Kansas State, against Baylor, against Oklahoma State. Michigan has made comebacks in the second half against Illinois, against Penn State, against Rutgers, and against Ohio State. They are just, both of these teams, but especially Michigan in the second half, they are machines at second half adjustments, machines at breaking you. Whether with TCU, it's their big plays, it's Max Duggan's inability to give up. It just wears on your defense. Or with Michigan, the powerful run game, the hidden explosive plays, the play action, the offensive line sucks the noise out of opposing stadiums, riles up fans at the Big House. And both of these teams, there's a reason, again, that they're playoff teams, because of what they do to their opponents and the identity behind these teams. They're tough. They're resilient. These two teams are some of the least talented teams to participate in the playoff by team talent composite, by the blue chip ratio, by recruiting standards. But these two schools and these two teams specifically might be some of the best at developing talent that we've seen in college football playoff history. This will especially be the case if either one of them win the national title, as they're both significantly, by recruiting rankings, much less talented than Georgia and Ohio State, which we will talk about, of course, in another video. But we're talking about TCU and Michigan today. And before I get into it, I encourage you all to like this video, hit the subscribe button, comment your score prediction for this game down below before you watch my prediction and preview, and comment your thoughts down below. And if you're a Michigan or an Ohio State fan, I encourage you to check out my merchandise store and purchase some of my Ohio State and Michigan shirts and some of my merchandise to support your team. Support your team and their colors in their college football playoff run. The link to my merchandise store, of course, is down below. If you're just someone who's curious in supporting this channel, and you're not an Ohio State or Michigan fan, I welcome you to do that and check out my merchandise store. Let's get into this game, though, and preview it. This game will take place on New Year's Eve, December 31st at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, and it will air on ESPN. Michigan is given a 67% chance to win, according to ESPN's FPI. Michigan's been favored in the FPI over every team to start a game except for Ohio State. And unless they beat TCU 63-0, and even if they do, Georgia would still be favored according to computers in the national title game. Unless Ohio State wins against Georgia barely and Michigan just blows out TCU, they will be underdogs if they win this game and move on to the national championship game. Both Ohio State and Georgia are ranked ahead of these teams in ESPN's FPI. But because TCU, and we'll get to this in a few, they're ranked rather low for a playoff team according to FPI standards, Michigan's given the best chance out of all playoff teams to participate, not win, but participate in the national championship game. Michigan, just to give some perspective, if this game was played 1,000 times, Michigan would win 670 of those games, according to computers. The Wolverines are favored by 7.5 points. And rightfully so, Michigan is either a modest to huge favorite to win this game. Both teams score 40 points per game, around that. Both offenses produce north of 450 yards total on offense. Both offenses pass and rush for 200 yards or more. Michigan passes for 210.5, TCU rushes for 200. And the areas of offense that are the strength of the both of these teams, even more yards are produced. TCU's passing offense produces 273 yards per game. Michigan's rushing offense produces 243 yards per game. An interesting fact about Michigan, TCU obviously is much better offensively on both the running and passing game compared to last year. Michigan has actually passed for less total yards. Despite having the better quarterback and the better passing game, they've passed for less total yards than they did last year. Like by a few hundred less. And they've only rushed for about 100 or 200 yards more. Michigan has just been they've improved a lot when it comes to offensive efficiency, and their defense has improved as well, but the offensive improvement, especially in the run game and conference play, is rather impressive and intimidating. For TCU, their gutsy play caller in Garrett Riley, Max Duggan, with his legs he can beat you, with his arm and wide receiver Quentin Johnson, they can torch you, they can saute you. Both these offenses are great. The reason Michigan, though, is favored is that defense. They only allow 13.4 points per game. TCU, in comparison, allows 25 points per game. It's a whopping... The margin of victory here for these two teams is a whopping 11 point... It's an 11.4 point differential for average margin of victory. And Michigan is favored by the differential and margin of victory. I think part of that has to do with the fact that TCU's lost a game, so they kind of have a wake-up call. It's partially due to the fact that Michigan is 0-1 in playoff games. TCU has, they have that passing game. TCU's offense, they're not going to be the best Michigan has faced by statistics and by talent. That'd be Ohio State. But I can tell you that TCU is going to be a lot more aggressive in their offensive play calling than Ryan Day was against the Wolverines. To get back to that defense, TCU allows 385.1 yards per game. Michigan only allows 277.1. Michigan allows only 85.2 yards rushing. TCU allows 149.5 yards rushing. The amount of yards passing, though, that TCU allows is 235.6, which is not even 50 yards off from the total amount of yards. Total amount of yards, not just passing yards, that Michigan's defense allows. So the defense, from an efficiency standpoint, analytical standpoint, eye test standpoint, from every view and perspective possible, Michigan has the superior defense. When it comes to the overall depth, when it comes to talent, starters, backups, staff, you got to give it to Michigan overall. Their staff, I'm going to give TCU Garrett Riley for OC over Sharon Moore and Matt Weiss, but I will say every other position outside of just the offensive play caller and the wide receivers coach for Texas Christian as well, I'm going to give it to Michigan here. They have the better head coach. They have the better defensive coordinator. They have the better strength and conditioning staff as well. Michigan, they're 13-0. Them and TCU have played roughly similar schedule. Now, when you look at different metrics or the ranked opponents TCU's faced, you might disagree, but Michigan has played the toughest opponent between the two of them in Ohio State on the road and beat them. Michigan also makes even better second half adjustments than the second half TCU Horned Frogs. At quarterback, Max Duggan and J.J. McCarthy, two of the best quarterbacks in the nation. Duggan is more battle-tested. Duggan, if we're being honest, his supporting cast is close to Michigan's, but he doesn't have the same offensive line. He doesn't have the same run game. Max Duggan, there's more pressure on him to win games than there is on J.J. McCarthy to win games. And he's statistically more impressive. He has 30 passing touchdowns, a 165.5 passer rating, completes 65% of his passes, and has thrown north of 3,000 yards. J.J. McCarthy, by comparison, has just a 155.4 rating, which is still really good, 20 passing touchdowns, 2,376 yards, and he completes 65% of his passes as well. Two really good quarterbacks, but Duggan's used more, and Duggan does play the better game. And I'm going to give TCU the edge there. And at wide receiver. At wide receiver, you have Quentin Johnson and you have Tay Barber. And Quentin Johnson is an NFL-level wide receiver. Tay Barber is also very good, too, and we'll certainly talk about them more. Quentin Johnson's actually rated as a top underclassman by ourlads.com, which I am using for team depth charts. Michigan at running back, tight end, offensive line, you got to give it to them. Luke Schoonmaker and Colston Loveland, one of the better tight end duos in the country. Loveland wasn't even projected to get a whole lot of playing time, but Eric All's injury happened, and not everything goes according to plan, but Colston Loveland is a beast. At running back, Blake Corum's injured, but Donovan Edwards will probably pass 1,000 rushing yards, whether Michigan wins this game or not. And he has 7 rushing touchdowns and averages over 7 yards per carry. Keandre Miller, he is a really impressive running back. He's passed the 1,000-yard mark himself. And listen, TCU's run game is impressive. They average 200 rushing yards per game. And Miller also has 17 rushing touchdowns. But Donovan Edwards, with that offensive line, and also his backups, Kalel Mullings and C.J. Stokes, Michigan still has better depth here and the better overall players. At offensive line with Oluwatimi, Ryan Hayes, Zach Zinter, and other names as well. Don't have to worry. This offensive line won the Joe Moore Award. End of discussion. And as we've already talked about, on defense and special teams, Michigan is just it. They have Jake Moody, Brad Robbins. Jake Moody, I think, was second-team All-American kicker. And you have Mike Morris at defensive line, Mozzie Smith. You have Junior Colson, and you have Mike Sanders still. Colson at linebacker, Sanders still at defensive back. Fantastic players, one of the best defenses in the country, with a chance to prove themselves as the best defense in the country, depending on what Michigan does in its playoff run. Michigan is ranked 4th in ESPN's FPI and also in ESPN's efficiency metrics. TCU, by comparison, as I mentioned, they're ranked rather low for a playoff team in FPI. They're only 10th in Football Power Index. They're 8th in efficiency. Both of these teams are also outside the top 10 when it comes to total team talent. You can find that at 24/7 Sports and just search for their team talent composite rankings. It totals all of the players on scholarship there, all of them, and it shows their star talent coming out of high school. Michigan's 14th, TCU's 32nd, and both of those relatively low for a team in the playoffs. The lowest would be Cincinnati from last year. TCU, I'm pretty confident, would be the second lowest. Michigan's still relatively low because Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, they've made it multiple times. Clemson has made it multiple times, and I think Clemson's first year in, they had a similar talent ranking to Michigan, but after that, they've risen into the top 10, and heck, even the top 5. Both of these teams have impressive strengths. Michigan's sorry about that. Their rushing attack is number 1 there. I spoke English. Anyway, the Horned Frogs, they don't have the nation's number 1 passing attack, but it's close to that. And more importantly, they're gutsy, they're bold, they're aggressive. And gutsy, bold, and aggressive play calling can make up for total talent and on-field performance. It can somewhat make up for it, and in some cases completely make up for it. The play calling that TCU has, it wasn't its greatest, when they ran a shotgun run on 4th and goal against Kansas State, but they have had good moments. I mean, there's a reason they're top 5 in the nation in plays of 20 yards or more. They're extremely explosive. And for Michigan, they're not as explosive, but they're still explosive. Number 1 rushing attack in the nation. There's no doubt about it. Period. Amen. There's just no doubt about it. On offense, Michigan is 4th in the nation in points per play. TCU is 7th. In yards per play, TCU's 18th, Michigan's 17th. In points per game, TCU's 6th compared to Michigan's 7th. And in offensive efficiency, TCU's 12th, Michigan's 7th. So by a lot of different efficiency metrics and statistics, Michigan, in fact, does have the better offense than TCU. And in talent, that's obvious. In player performance, I'd say that that's quite obvious, except at the wide receiver and quarterback positions, but overall obvious. But play calling has been part of Michigan's problem all year. Outside of that Big 12 championship game, the play calling is what has helped TCU achieve this playoff run, not their natural recruited talent. Let's talk about, speaking of that talent, players to watch in this game, players that can make or break this team and their chances to win it all. These players are Donovan Edwards for Michigan and Max Duggan for TCU. For Donovan Edwards has been in and out with injuries. There's been games where he's been inconsistent, but he is a much better player than he was last year. In Michigan's 2 top 10 wins, Penn State and Ohio State, he led the team in rushing, not Corum. Edwards led the team in rushing in Michigan's 2 biggest wins when it comes to end of season ranking and ranking at the time of Michigan played. He averaged over 10 yards per carry in both of those, not both of those games, but overall. 9.8 against Ohio State, 10.8 against Penn State. He had 4 total touchdowns in those games, all rushing. He had 3 receptions for 30 yards. He only had 1 fumble, but it wasn't lost, and that was against Penn State late after he already had his 67 long rushing touchdown. He had a 75-yard and an 85-yard rush against Ohio State, and he had nearly 400 rushing yards. Nearly 400 rushing yards on 38 attempts against both of those teams. On the year, he has 117 attempts for 872 rushing yards for 7 rushing touchdowns, an average of 7.5 yards per carry. He also has 192 receiving yards on 17 receptions for 11.3 yards per reception and 2 receiving touchdowns, with a long reception of 33, a long rush of 85. At 6'1", 204 pounds, when it comes to him and Corum, he is the more talented back. Corum's just been more consistent. Corum has more power. Corum has more endurance. He has the much higher floor than Edwards does, but Edwards' ceiling is limitless. There's a chance that when he comes back next year, he will be the best running back in the country. And here and now, with Corum hurt, he has a chance to win Michigan the national title behind that offensive line with his explosiveness out of the backfield as a receiver, as a runner, with his downfield threat in the receiving game, with his acceleration. I mean, his top-end speed is amongst one of the best in the nation. He's legit. So watch out for him, because if he gets going, he's gone. You will not catch him in open space. You will also struggle to tackle him. You will struggle to break him down. You'll struggle to hurt him. You'll struggle to get him to fumble the ball now that his hand is healthy and will likely be out of that fist shield in this game. For TCU, when it comes to toughness, when it comes to overall talent, the story is pretty similar. For quarterback, not running back, but quarterback, Max Duggan. Different position we're talking about here, but similar toughness, similar talent. Duggan was not rated as highly coming out of high school, but boy, he has proven himself on the field. 3,321 passing yards, which is 19th in the country. 30 passing touchdowns, which is 12th. 4 interceptions, which is tied for 11th. And a QBR of 13. 79.9. By 13, I meant 13th in the country. He also, on top of that, has 404 rushing yards for 3.6 yards per carry and 6 rushing touchdowns. He's been sacked 23 times. He has a 165.5 passer rating. Really impressive young man. He's a senior, 6'2", 210 pounds. He's fast on the ground. And in that game against Kansas State, where he had a season high rushing attempts with 15, he had 110 rushing yards, which was second in the season, for 7.3 yards per carry and 1 rushing touchdown. He carried that team in that Kansas State game. And in so many games, it has been up to him to do his job, to put his team in a position to win, and he's done it. This man torches defenses. You cannot stop him. You can only limit him and contain him. There's a reason that amongst C.J. Stroud and Caleb Williams, he went to New York. And even Stetson Bennett, too. Stetson Bennett, similar scrambling ability and similar deep arm. He's actually a pretty similar overall player to Max Duggan. Both are older when it comes to the average age of college football players. They aren't talked about really as NFL prospects, or they weren't before this season. Now they have several years of a good resume, and they have playoff appearances and, great seasons and high achievements to show for. And Max Duggan, he's gutsy, he's tough, he's not afraid to tire himself out. He will sacrifice his body for his team to win. as advertised in that Kansas State game. And he has wide receivers, and he has a deep arm, and he is not afraid to take risks. So watch out for Max Duggan. Michigan's defense makes great adjustments, and they play great football coming into even the first half. But Max Duggan, he will give them some problems. But those problems will not be enough. They won't. Michigan's offense and defense are too elite, too talented, and too well coached to be stopped. Michigan will reach the national title game by a score of 48-27. Michigan from the beginning will lead. They won't dominate TCU, and they won't truly pull away score-wise until the late third or early fourth quarter. But you will know, probably at some point in the first half or immediately at the beginning of the second half when Michigan's adjustments will take over, that the Wolverines will win, that they will win handily. The running backs will have 250 yards or more rushing and 3 rushing touchdowns or more. Michigan will have a frenzy on the ground against this TCU defense, and the Wolverine defense will excel at getting pressure on Max Duggan. Will they be perfect? No. Max Duggan will probably break away some runs. He will make some big plays. I think the Horned Frogs will make 2 or more big plays, and by big plays I don't really mean I don't mean just 15 or even 20 yards. I mean probably 25 or 30 yards or more. They will gash Michigan at one point or another, like what Ohio State did. Touchdown pass to Marvin Harrison Jr. and another deep ball to Emeka Egbuka. Ohio State had 2 big plays against that Michigan defense and only scored 23. So if you think that TCU, if they get 2 or 3 or 4 big plays, that they'll beat Michigan, with TCU's defense, Michigan's offense, and the fact that Michigan's defense does somewhat play a bend but don't break game, Michigan can certainly have some errors, have some things that don't go their way, and their defense can still pressure TCU's offense into making mistakes, always keep TCU on the edge. And I think Michigan's run game with Donovan Edwards, Kalel Mullings, their blocking with the tight ends, offensive linemen, and J.J. McCarthy gives Michigan something they didn't have last year. A deep ball and scrambling capabilities, and a willingness to run and get hit while you run and not just slide. Michigan also has a better O-line than they did last year. Michigan is better. They are superior at every position except for defensive end and edge rusher compared to last year. They're superior at every position. When healthy, they're superior at every position compared to last year, except for defensive end. This defense is better at manufacturing a pass rush through schematics than last year's defense. Jesse Minter is better than Mike McDonald. And I think the regular season Big Ten championship game, and I think this game will prove that. His staff is better. This is the best Michigan team since 1997. And if they win it all, and if they dominate TCU like I think they will, and if they beat Georgia handily or Ohio State handily for the second time, they might be the best Michigan football team ever in the modern era of college football. But it's one game at a time. It is just one game at a time. TCU is no one to mess with, no one to underestimate. Their rush defense, I think, will cost them dearly. I think it will be their Achilles heel. I think that if I am to say what this game will look like, I think it will look like the Penn State game for Michigan, except it's neutral site, it's in Arizona, the stadium will be majorly Michigan fans, of course, but TCU's secondary is good enough. They just are. They're good enough, they have good players, they will be able to do some things against Michigan's pass offense, I think. And J.J. McCarthy played phenomenally after that bad first quarter against OSU. Overall had one of his better games from a pass completion standpoint and an efficiency standpoint against Purdue. I think that there is a chance he might be due in for one of his more average performances against TCU. And with the way that TCU's run defense is, I think that's A-okay. Because if Michigan wins this game, they need to have McCarthy rested and playing his A game against Georgia or Ohio State. The Horned Frogs, again, will have 2 or more big plays. I think with just Max Duggan's scrambling ability, Quentin Johnson and Tay Barber's ability to target corners and safeties one-on-one, get open, and especially Quentin Johnson. He's like 6'3", 6'4", over 200 pounds in body weight, all muscle. NFL wide receiver build. Almost has 1,000 receiving yards, too. I mean, TCU... They scheme guys open. Their guys are talented enough to get open on their own. And Duggan, Heisman finalist QB. I think he should have won it. It should have been between him and Caleb Williams to win it. Caleb Williams won it. I think Duggan placed in second. Yes, he did place in second. The road to win it all ends here in Arizona for TCU, in my opinion. Of course, the games play themselves. I could be wrong. There is a scenario where TCU wins here. Michigan isn't given a 100% chance to win. But I think with Michigan's run game, I would not be shocked if Michigan had more than 300 rushing yards. I wouldn't be shocked if Michigan had close to 600 total yards and over the 500 mark. I think TCU by total yards, they'll definitely get over 400 on this Michigan team. Not just because TCU's offense is good, but because Michigan's defense isn't afraid to give up big chunks of yards if they hold you to field goals, like they did against Purdue, against Ohio State, and against other teams as well. I think Michigan wins big here, and I think they will be 14-0, facing off against either a 14-0 Georgia or a 12-1 Ohio State in the college football playoff. And with that, that's the end of this video. If you liked it, make sure to support this channel by hitting that like button, hitting that subscribe button, commenting your thoughts on this video and my prediction down below, and hitting that notification bell if you haven't already. If you're listening via Spotify, also make sure to follow the channel and check out my merchandise store if you haven't already. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all around. Bye-bye.